Hello everybody, my name's Richard and I'm a Brit who's becoming slightly obsessed with Norway. So I've started this channel so I can react and discover and learn about Norway and its culture. I've done a few holiday trips there and I love it more each time. So, you know, there is a possibility in the future that it might be an option to actually relocate and move to Norway. So this is my journey of discovery. And today's video is the history of Norway. I thought it was a great place to start. So let's go and find out. It's 12 minutes long. Link to the original video is down below. So please go and check it out. And let's find out the history of Norway and its struggles for independence. Alrighty, let's go.
Norway is one of the most expensive countries in Europe today, thanks to the discovery of oil in the 1960s. Still, Norway's independence is more recent than the United States' independence.
Now, of course, I'm going to have to pause this because I'm learning as we're going. This is the first time I've watched any of these. Already, I'm surprised at how late Norway got its independence. I had no idea. It seems like an ancient country. So I don't know. That just surprised me already. There we go.
Norway is famous today for its breathtaking landscapes and connection to the Vikings. The country is in Scandinavia, on the northern edge of the European continent, and its geographic location has impacted much of Norway's development. People weren't even able to live there until after the last ice age due to glaciers covering the land. But after they settled into villages there, the Norwegians quickly began exploring the world, looking for ways to acquire the resources they needed. Even though the Vikings were among the most influential people during the Viking Age, Norway didn't maintain its powerful position. Instead, it soon fell under Danish and, later on, Swedish control. The Nazis even occupied them for a few years during World War II. The history of Norway is filled with strong leaders and a yearning to be free to live their lives in the beauty of the land they call home. Didn't the Vikings come from Norway? The Vikings heralded from Scandinavia, so although Norway was beginning to differentiate itself from other Scandinavian countries, they still had Viking communities. The Vikings were not connected to any national identity. They didn't even call themselves Vikings. That term was applied explicitly to the Scandinavian cultural groups engaged in naval explorations and raids during the 19th century.
Yeah, it's always been an interesting point, this, isn't it? That I don't know how people from Norway feel about being lumped in with the word Scandinavian. In fact, all the Scandinavian countries, you know, I don't know how you feel about being called Scandinavian. You know, in the UK, you know, none of the individual countries like being associated with the others. We're not friendly over here. So I do wonder what it's like in Scandinavia and if you like being called Scandinavian. So let me know if that's interesting. Okay.
The Vikings initially identified as part of their regions, such as Jutland or Vestford, but eventually they began to identify as Danes or Norse, which were southern and northern regions of Scandinavia, respectively. The Viking Ages was a critical time in Norse history. This was the first time Norway began defining itself as a separate geographic entity. They had their own rulers, but they still had close ties with other Scandinavian groups, leading to alliances and conflicts. Of course, the modern countries of Scandinavia didn't exist yet, and during the early Viking Age, Norway was made up of several little kingdoms. Norway was naturally separated from the developing countries of Sweden and Denmark by geography, which helped the Norse begin developing their own cultural identity, separate from the rest of Scandinavia. For a long time, the Norse relied upon farming as the primary source of their livelihood, but the land was not suited to agriculture. Historians believe the Vikings living in Norway turned to sailing as the population rose. At first, they set out as traders and visited neighboring European countries like the British Isles.
See, that's always interested me about, because obviously there's farms in Norway, but how do you cope with the weather? I mean, like, is farming just a couple of months of the year? Is southern Norway more farmable? I've no idea. Again, like I said, I've only been on holiday to Bergen and Oslo, and we did a road trip through Norway. So I was not really paying attention to the whole, and we did it in the summertime, so I've no idea what it's like in the winter. But I can imagine it being quite harsh. Hence why they set off to try and find other lands, I suppose, to plunder. It's a good word, plunder. I like it.
But the traders soon turned into raiders.
Oh,
The Vikings were feared across Europe. Their naval innovations meant they could travel vast distances on the open sea and bring their boats up rivers. They raided Britain, continental Europe, in the Mediterranean Sea, and even sailed west to North America.
Good effort.
The Norse Vikings tended to stick to the west, but their encounters with Europe showed them national kingships and the importance of urban centers. When the Norse Vikings returned, they brought all of these ideas with them and united Norway under one king. Uniting the various kingships in Norway took about a century and was filled with internal political strife. Eventually, Harald Fairhair emerged as the country's first leader, calling himself Harald I. Because of Norway's challenging landscape, it is likely that although Harald I was king, he ruled through alliances with other chieftains. Regardless, Harald I is still credited with uniting Norway, and his successors would continue the process of bringing all of Norway directly under one king.
Right.
The path to unification was filled with political rivals, civil wars, and outside threats from Denmark and Sweden. But by the Scandinavian medieval era, Norway had stabilized and moved into a golden age where there was a general peace and a growing trade economy. During the Middle Ages, Norway focused on expanding its territory. The king focused on creating positive relationships with the aristocracy and the church. The local chieftains did not have patriotic feelings toward Norway, so they tended only to support the king when it benefited them. Controlling this large country without the cooperation of the local leaders was difficult, so the king was constantly striving to strengthen his relationship with the aristocracy. Local chieftains became lenman, meaning men of the land. In return for their loyalty, they received part of the royal lands.
Yeah.
Chieftains who did not become landmen were driven out of Norway or killed. So the king was finally able to secure the loyalty and cooperation of the aristocracy. The Norse king also focused on cultivating a positive relationship with the church. The king was a major force behind the Christianization of Norway, encouraging conversion and building churches. And he soon became the head of the church and its primary protector. Of course, the king was also focused on controlling the large peasant population. They needed security, and he provided that by upholding the laws and providing military protection.
Large peasant population. That sounds like a flock of chickens, doesn't it? Jesus, it's a harsh term. Blimey. Okay, all right.
In turn, the peasants provided the king with things like labor, food, ships, and weapons. This exchange would lead to the creation of a conscripted army and an impressive naval force. Unlike other European countries at the time, the peasants of Norway were not serfs, but instead they were freemen. Their political opinions were of vital importance to the country, and there were two different assemblies that they participated in, the Alting and the Lagting. The Alting has prehistorical origins, and it was a local body sprinkled across the towns and countryside to handle judicial matters and common political interests. It also hosted special legal ceremonies where the king and the peasants exchanged pledges. The king organized the Lagting as a representative assembly for a specific area of the country, dealing with political issues that concerned multiple communities, high judicial matters, and the ratification of laws. For part of the Middle Ages, Norway enjoyed general peace and prosperity. Still, when the Black Death hit in 1349, they saw a sudden drop in the population. Farms were abandoned, and an economic crisis shook the nation to its core. Outside investors began to settle in Norway, drawn in by the population decline and the economic opportunities in the fishing and timber industries. Tension grew between the native workers and the independent traders, especially those from Germany, and violence between the groups was common. Although the towns were now developing and were more connected with the outside world, the German merchants still prevented the development of a Norwegian middle class and drained many of the profits of trade away from the country. It seemed like Norway's golden age was over. How did Norway come under outside dominance?
Yeah.
Throughout their golden age, Norway had become entangled with the royal families of Sweden and Denmark through marriage. These alliances had been helpful at the time, but the trouble began in 1375 when King Valdemar IV of Denmark died. The Norwegian Prince Olaf II inherited the throne, bringing the two countries together under one ruler for about 400 years. In 1397, Sweden also joined, and the Kalmar Union turned the three Scandinavian kingdoms into one. The project was utterly
Kalmar Union. Never heard of that before. Okay, so is that... I'm trying to see where that is. Oh, so that's a bit of Finland there, isn't it? Okay, yeah, right, okay.
Union turned the three Scandinavian kingdoms into one.
Yeah.
The project was utterly Danish. Denmark was the strongest of the three. But Sweden eventually declared its independence and broke away from the Kalmar Union in 1523, becoming entirely liberated in 1570. This exit left Denmark and Norway united. Denmark was leery of Norway trying to follow Sweden's example, so they decided to turn Norway into a Danish province. They disposed of the Norwegian National Council in 1536,
Harsh.
imposed Protestantism, and attempted to enforce cultural assimilation. Historians are divided on whether or not this time under Denmark's rule was beneficial for Norway. Some historians believe it gave Norway time to grow economically, ideologically, and socially. However, other historians think that Norway would have grown anyway, and instead they believe Denmark held Norway back from achieving its full potential during the 1500s. Norway calls the period between 1500 and 1800 the time of the Union, and they grew economically and in population. Trade continued to grow as the demand for fish, timber, and iron increased as other European countries discovered new lands and Norway began importing corn and some finished products. However, the time of the Union was not beneficial for other parts of Norway's development. Their industrial development was delayed because they were not in a good position to produce their own finished products. Also, this time in European history was filled with wars, and although Norway was not directly involved in any major conflicts, Denmark exploited the Norwegians by using them as workers and soldiers to strengthen the Danish position in Europe.
Oh, interesting. So I didn't realise there was quite this level of hostility between Norway and Denmark. I mean, I suppose it is hostility, isn't it? Because they are controlling Norway. But I never realised. I knew the main Viking threat came from Norway, but I had no idea that they were sort of almost holding Norway back for their own gain. I had no idea. And Sweden had long gone by then. They've jumped ship already. But yeah, okay, I'm seeing now. Again, how's the relationship Norway and Sweden these days? And Norway and Denmark especially. How's the relationship there? Are you all friends or not?
In addition, many of the elites in Norse society at this time were outsiders, such as German or Danish people. The Norse people tended to be lower class, and many battled poverty. They rented farmland and usually had to work multiple jobs to take care of their families, although land ownership improved when the Norse king, who was under the Danish king's control, decided to sell royal land to pay debts and provide cash for the monarchy. The increased available land turned many Norwegian peasants into freeholders, which elevated their position slightly. Despite the somewhat better prospects for the Norse people, they were still under Denmark's rule, and they began realizing how very dangerous that was for their country's future development. How did Norway finally become independent? Although Denmark was the most powerful of the three Scandinavian countries, Sweden still had imperialistic dreams of its own. But the balance of power didn't change until 1625. Denmark continued to involve itself in European wars, and during the 30 Years' War, they suffered enough of a setback that Sweden began to take some of the Danish territories for itself.
Oh, sneaky.
Also, the Danes continued to require Norway to provide soldiers. The Norse soldiers proved to be serious fighters, and their stories helped fuel Norwegian nationalism. Sweden wanted Norway to be part of their country, and as almost all of Europe became entrenched in the Napoleonic Wars, it seemed the perfect time to pull Norway away from Denmark.
That's amazing, isn't it? This is fascinating. So it's not been plain sailing ever, has it? This has got to be the most calm you've had, calm of times you've had for a long, long time at the moment. Sweden trying to grab you, Denmark trying to grab you.
Sweden sided with Great Britain, but Denmark sided with France,
Go on, Sweden.
which led to a British naval blockade that separated Norway from Denmark, making it difficult for Denmark to control the Norse people. Norway struggled to get the imports it desperately needed, like food, and the country's fate seemed to hang in the balance of the war. Great Britain and Russia promised Sweden that they would give it Norway for its help in the Napoleonic Wars.
Oh, thanks.
After some political disagreements,
Sorry about that.
Norway joined Sweden in 1814 with a new Norwegian constitution, which became the foundation for modern Norse political life. It built a government with a king, an assembly for legislature and taxation called the Storting, and a separate judicial system. Norway was joined with Sweden for about 90 years, but the constitution made it clear that although the two countries were joined, Norway had finally achieved independence. With their new independence, Norway began to recover economically and enjoyed a growing population again. Industry began to take off, and Norse entrepreneurs began creating finished products instead of importing all of them. The Norwegian government also invested in infrastructures like roads, postal services, telegraph networks, harbors, steamboats, and railroads. However, this progress was inhibited by Norway's union with Sweden, which, despite claiming otherwise, viewed Norway as inferior. The Norse people were done with foreign oppression. They were proud of the national identity they had created despite years of foreign rule and were ready for true independence. In 1905, they finally managed to break away from Sweden and establish their own free country.
1905. I can't believe that. 1905, that's how long it's taken. That's unbelievable. It's been a whole history of just oppression and takeovers and just wars. And gee, I can't believe that.
They were now free to make their own international decisions and steer their country into a better tomorrow without worrying about a foreign government denying them the right to be the best version of themselves. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the history of Norway, check out our book, History of Norway, a captivating guide to Norwegian history.
Interesting.
It's available as an ebook and paperback. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more.
Oh, that came to a sudden end, didn't it? That was, I thought we were going to have a bit more then.
Norway.
Yeah, that ended sooner than I wanted it to. I want the rest of the history. But that was a cool video. That was really interesting. I had no idea all that was going on. Poor Norwegians, eh? So like I said, I'm just learning everything I can about Norway at the minute. So I'm just going to be reacting to all sorts of things. I thought, well, while I'm watching these, I may as well just record it. So like I said, the link to the original video is below. If you've got any suggestions of other videos you'd like me to watch, whatever subject to do with Norway, then just drop in the link in the link below. Drop it in the description below, in the comments. That's the word I'm looking for. And I'll make sure to check it out. So thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.